Hello, welcome. My name is Shaya Hecht. I took over OKclarity's account tonight to discuss the client-therapist relationship. So this is a broad topic, very broad topic, which probably we won't get to everything in one sitting, but I hope that this will be meaningful and that you'll learn something. So I guess we begin this topic by really exploring the complexity of the relationship that the clients and therapists have, because they're unlike any relationship that anyone's experienced before. It's quite confusing, complex, difficult to navigate, and especially for people who have experienced challenges in attachment, it creates real challenge. So I hope to honor that and hopefully provide some perspective and ways that maybe the shame could go down around that. So let's just first begin by talking about the nature of the dynamic between the therapist and client. So our usual reference points are friends, parents, family. When it comes to therapists, we might expect some familiar type of feeling that way, but therapists and clients have a very different type of dynamic where they're fully present, hopefully, but also very boundaried, which could be very frustrating because that's not usually what we're used to. We're used to some sort of, let's say in a friendship, like a give and take, or we're used to receiving from parents, but also having access to our parents and having them soothe us when we need them, hopefully. Right? But when it comes to therapists, they're limited in their time, they're boundaried. So let's just talk a little bit about why that might be. So in order for a client in therapy to feel safe, they need an objective space, a totally objective space that's all for them and doesn't satisfy any need that a therapist has. So anybody who's in a healthy therapy hopefully has a therapist that doesn't have any agenda. And the agenda really just is for the client to heal, to have a safe space for the client to heal. And in order for them to do that, all of their needs have to be set aside, and they also have to have their needs met from another source, right? Like their own family, their own therapy, their own relationships. So what happens in therapy is that there's this beautiful space, hopefully, of safety and connection, but we don't always have access to that, which gets frustrating. And every therapist really has their own way of, unique way of dealing with boundaries, some different than others. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong here, but hopefully we could discuss like what a healthy therapy dynamic would look like, because it could be confusing. And people ask me all the time, how do I know if my therapist is healthy? How do I know if the way I'm feeling makes any sense? So hopefully we'll give some clarity to that, as well as answer some questions that were submitted. So let's talk about that frustrating dynamic, especially as it comes to trauma in relationships. So if people have struggled with attachment trauma, that means that there was a rupture within a relationship. And that's usually where the people have struggled with that. That's usually where the challenge in therapy comes, because therapy is a form of attachment. And as adults, you might be familiar with attachment as children, where you attach to your parents and they take care of you and they nurture you. And as adults, we also have attachment, and it actually typically mirrors the attachment that we've had as a child. So in the same way, whatever attachment I saw your comment, I don't want to get distracted right now, I'm going to look at it soon. The attachment that you have with your therapist is going to probably reflect very much on the way that your attachment was when you were young. So typically the people who struggle with attachment with their therapist have an anxious attachment style. And usually that's because their parents were inconsistent for them, they don't have their own feelings of self-worth, and they very much rely on the other person to give them that self-worth. So here's why it gets really challenging. When you have a rupture in attachment from when you're young, the wound is in relationships, and therefore it could be very difficult to have a new safe experience within a relationship, because relationships themselves are very scary. So now you're going to come into a relationship with a therapist, and that in and of itself is a very scary thing to do, because your brain and body senses danger, which is very, very normal because there's been hurt there before. And therefore, the fight or flight type of response is going to kick in, which is I'm going to either have to push, fight with whatever the stress is, or run away and shut down. And that's like some of the question that was submitted was about that, where you're feeling very, very needy and on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're feeling like you need that distance from that, or you're feeling shame about that. So there is a very challenging dynamic with therapy and probably with your other relationships as well. So there's a push and a pull, there's a feeling shame, there's a feeling needy, and there's also something called transference. So if you're feeling, let's say, really nurtured by your therapist, right, and it almost has like a motherly feel, then you're going to react as if you were a child yearning for your mother to be taking care of you. So you're constantly going to want their attention, and you might want to reach them at, even non-therapy times. And the boundaries that are in place are going to get very frustrating, because in your system it's feeling like it's your parent, but in reality it's your therapist, and your therapist has boundaries. And the reason why they have boundaries is so that they could provide a safe space for you and not become that parental figure, but become a therapist, which is totally, totally objective and all about you. So that's where all of that gets very, very confusing and frustrating. And it's really important to be able to have a safe therapy space to talk about these frustrations with your therapist, because when you have attachment challenges, the way to deal with them, and the way to deal with any challenge and any conflict really, is to do some conflict resolution. And oftentimes people feel like if they open up to a therapist about this, the therapist, especially with fear abandonment or something like that, which comes with that anxious attachment style, we're going to fear that our therapist is not going to like us anymore, they're not going to value us, they're going to get upset at us, and we confuse disappointment with a lack of love, right, when we have that type of attachment style. So if my therapist maybe gets disappointed in me, which is most likely not true anyways, then they don't really love me, they don't really like me, and therefore I should not open up to them. But it's really important to find the courage within the therapy to bring up these challenges to your therapist. It's very important for them to know what's going on for you, so that they could provide what's called a corrective experience, so that your brain can see and learn, and your body can learn that there can be a safe way to connect. And even though there may have been pain and shame and hurt in previous relationships, but in this relationship there's a corrective experience which creates new neural pathways in your brain, and now your brain and body can feel like we can connect and feel safe again. Now, safety doesn't mean that we're always feeling blissful. It doesn't mean we love everything that's going on with our therapist, or with anyone for that matter, that we have a safe relationship with. But it does mean that there's a safety within this relationship, that we have earned trust with each other, that if there's challenge within this relationship, we're going to come together and do a repair. In abusive relationships, we don't get that chance. Right? We don't get a chance. We're either told that we're the problem and we're shamed, or there's nobody emotionally available for us to be able to express ourselves in a way where we could be seen and heard and understood. So eventually we learn to stop taking that risk and shut all of that down, and we split off from our personalities and just try to become the type of person that this person would approve of. But hopefully in therapy we would never have to do that, because the therapist is very healthy, understands your attachment style, understands the challenge that you've had in attachment, and can create a very, very safe, soothing, secure space where you could connect. In order for that to be effective, you have to be able to learn how to express yourself with what's going on for you. And that's something that is okay, but it may not be okay to your system, because your system's learned from previous pain that was never okay. So what I would suggest is to take like a small risk, a small one, and to open yourself up about what's bothering you, about your therapist's boundary or something like that, and see if they help you feel seen, heard, soothed, and then that is what develops a secure attachment. But if you're not opening up to them and just struggling with this dynamic, which makes sense because it's a very confusing dynamic, you're really left all alone in your struggle, and you're left like feeling very needy and maybe lashing out at them sometimes, and maybe asking for a lot from them and feeling shame about that, and then pushing them away and minimizing your need for connection. The bottom line is every human is wired for connection, and we all need it, and we desperately need it in order to survive. So it's okay to have all these type of challenges with your therapist. It's 100% okay. Okay, so one of the questions that was asked was about whether a person has to like their therapist. So it's very important to, well, actually, let me get the full question. The exact question was, that they don't feel as connected to their therapist as their old one, and they're not feeling the same desire to go to therapy, and should they switch therapists? So I don't know the reason why this person doesn't like their therapist, but it's very normal to not like everything about people that you're in relationships with, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a good relationship with that person, right? So it depends why you don't like them. If they're feeling judged, if they're causing you to feel judged and shame, then that's something that's really not okay, and that's something that's going to disrupt and the safety that should be there in order for you to heal. If that's the case, then I would suggest ejecting yourself out of such a situation as quickly as possible and getting yourself the safety that you deserve. But if that's not the case, and you're feeling safe and secure, and you're able to really be connected to some degree, where you have positive alliance with the therapist, but you just don't like some things about them. So again, I think it's a great thing to bring up to your therapist the things that you don't like about them, and that's okay. There's no relationship in the world, I don't think, where you like everything about the other person. So you can bring that up and learn how to negotiate that type of challenge and that type of struggle within a relationship, and that way you'll be able to see that how that's done in a safe, secure way, and you'll be able to do that outside of the therapy room. If your therapist responds in a way that you don't feel safe and secure, that's another sign that safety can't be developed here, and safety is a foundation for healing. So time to get out. That's the answer to whether or not you need to like your therapist. So I think overall there should be things you like about them. I think you should be able to like the safety and security that they provide. But in terms of their personality, if there's things that irk you and stuff like that, I think that's okay, as long as you're feeling like you have safety and safety and security within the relationship, where you're able to express yourself and feel seen, heard, secure, soothed. If you're able to do that, then I think that your therapy is going to be okay. I think the question also asked about whether, if they do need to switch, how do they bring it up to their parents? I don't know how old this person is, but hopefully our parents want what's best for us. And again, this is when something bothers us, we should express it to the people who are there to support us. So hopefully these are supportive parents where you're able to say, hey, listen, I really appreciate that you're supporting me through this therapy, but this therapist is really I'm not really feeling so connected to them. I'm not really feeling so safe with them. I really need your help to transition to another therapist. The second question was about like obsessing over a therapist and constantly feeling angry. I guess I should read the exact thing. I'm very attached to my therapist, who I'm with for 1.5 years. I think of her all day, and I'm not the same person I used to be. I often get angry at her for not meeting my needs. Example, I ask for compliments. I want her to show more interest in me, or whatever signs to show that she cares. When I get angry, I tend to become disrespectful, and she usually offers me to go and find a new therapist and end our relationship. That freaks me out. I end up apologizing and or proving my progress to her, but I end up being even more insecure that she will leave me one day. Will I ever be able to end therapy if this continues this way? I'm in such turmoil. How would a good therapist deal with someone like me with such an unhealthy attachment/transference? Okay, so the first thing that I have to say, like I just talked about before, is that this is an extremely normal experience. So this person is probably feeling a lot of shame about how they're attaching to their therapist, and they're calling it unhealthy. I don't think it's necessarily unhealthy, I guess in some ways, but it's really just called anxious attachment. And it makes a lot of sense based on their attachment from childhood. The fact that they are wanting more and asking for what they want is incredible. That shows a lot of courage by this person, and give yourself a pat on the back that you have the ability to ask for that. It sounds like the therapist doesn't always meet your need, and you get angry and you become disrespectful. That's because you turn into a fight or flight response, like we described before, and you're no longer thinking rationally. This part of your brain in the prefrontal cortex is not online. You're in a part of your brain that's just reacting to feeling unsafe. And when you do that, when any of us are in that part of our brain, we react with a trauma response, which is for survival, and you're just trying to get to express your needs in any way that you can in order to survive. In terms of the fact that she says, go ahead and find another therapist, so I don't want to comment on this specific therapist and the way that they're responding to, because I have no idea. But if somebody's in therapy and they feel like their therapist is dismissing them as like, go ahead and find another therapist if I'm not good enough for you, if that sounds like it's coming from a space within the therapist where they're feeling maybe insecure themselves, then maybe bring it up and see how they respond. But if they're saying, hey, listen, I see you, I hear you, and you're feeling seen, heard, soothed, and understood, that like, I understand that you need more from me. However, I'm very limited in my ability to provide exactly what you need. If you need to speak to me every single day, I don't have that type of ability. Hopefully we could come up with something where you could feel like I care about you. But if the need is to talk about them all the time, and they say that they can't meet that need, and maybe there's another therapist that can, right? Where there might be another therapist that can, for example, like in DBT therapy or something like that, where the boundaries are very, very different. So they're not necessarily dismissing you, but they could be saying, like, if this isn't working for you, I understand. But if they're causing like a shame response within you of like, you're just too much and you're asking for too much, then then that doesn't feel good, and you're not going to be able to feel that safety. In terms of like what a healthy therapist, I think you asked about like what a healthy therapist would do. So I think they would do that. I think they would totally validate what you're experiencing, explain the history and your attachment style and why you're attaching in this way and why you're constantly feeling needy and reaching out, and also validate the frustration and grieve over the fact that you don't have this type of access to your therapist. Also, hopefully explain the concept of transference, and also explain the concept of fight or flight and why your brain is going offline and why you're reacting this way, and they don't lash out at you back and they keep a regulated state. And if they do get dysregulated as a therapist, which is normal and human, hopefully they apologize and repair, which is the corrective response. And that would be the normal, quote unquote, way that a therapist would deal with it. They would validate, they would hold the space, continue to hold the space of safety, they would stay regulated themselves. If they would get dysregulated at any time, they would repair and apologize. So I hope that answers that question. And the person who asked about, do you need to love your therapist or could they be good enough? It's very similar to the first question. So again, do you need to love your therapist? So I don't know if you need to love your therapist, but again, if you have that positive connection, then that is something that will provide safety, and then you could be okay. So I don't know if you have to like really love them, but if somebody is feeling like love for their therapist, that's a very good sign, typically, right? It's a sign that there's something here that's very, very meaningful. And sometimes that turns into transference. Like we said, like you really want the parental figure, you want constant access to them. And sometimes, I guess we should mention that there's something called erotic transference, where this could turn, this attachment and feeling nurture and connection could turn into feelings of arousal, things like that, and could create that type of transference. And again, that's something very, very normal, and many, many therapists are very aware of that, but a lot of times a lot of shame that clients feel from that. But it's something that's a very normal response. So I think everybody should be aware and not feel shame about that. So I saw a couple of questions in the comments, so let me just see here. Someone said, I used to view my therapist as a mother figure, but she terminated the relationship because it was getting very unhealthy. Yeah, so a healthy therapist will hopefully, if they recognize that they are no longer objective, then it's their responsibility to terminate the therapy. Sometimes they don't do that, and they allow the dynamic to continue. It's very, very important for clients to know that it's not their responsibility to make sure that the relationship is safe. I want to repeat that because I think there's a lot of shame around this. It's not a client's responsibility to ensure that there's a safe relationship between them and their therapist. It's the therapist's job to create the boundaries and the safety around the relationship. So the fact that a client's pushing boundaries, again, we just said over and over again why that makes a lot of sense. It's a therapist's job to maintain the boundaries and to keep the relationship safe. If a therapist realizes that they can't do that for whatever reason, that's very human and that's normal. If they wouldn't be able to do that, and at that point it would be their responsibility to terminate the relationship, but it's not something for the client to feel shame over it because another therapist would have been able to handle that. Right? It's just something unique about this therapist that they couldn't do that. It doesn't mean they're a bad therapist. It just means there's something within this dynamic that triggers them or that brings up things in them where they have something called countertransference, which is another topic for another day. And if that's getting in the way and they're not able to resolve it, then they can't create that objective safe space, and it's their responsibility to terminate. I've unfortunately heard about many, many situations where there were very unhealthy relationships with the therapist, and the therapist did not terminate, and the client felt a lot of shame about that and continues to feel shame about it, and they think it's their fault, which makes a lot of sense based on their histories, like we described before, in relationships where they've been blamed for being the problem. So when there's a challenge and a rupture or a breach of boundaries, the client will naturally blame themselves, but of course it's not their fault. Somebody says sometimes the safety and security can become addictive because we're so not used to it. We can obsess over it. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I mean, I understand that we want that safety and security and we want more of it. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense. If we're trying really hard to keep that connection and keep going, that's why we want more from our therapist. And it feels like abandonment when our therapist says, I'm so sorry, like I'm not available to you right now. And again, that will trigger the fight or flight response where you're going to have that type of reaction where you'll either lash out or withdraw or shut down. Very, very normal. And the therapist remains regulated and helps to co-regulate with you so that you could get back to yourself and reconnect. What's my take on a female seeing a male therapist or vice versa? So this is the question of the year. In terms of from a clinical perspective, which is the only perspective that I can speak on, I have no problem with it. Hope that answers your question. Okay. If there's no other questions, I think we covered it. So let's just review briefly some of the points that we made. And if we need to do more of these, I'll pray that I can find some more time. So let's just review. Number one, we discussed the dynamic with the therapist and how challenging that could be. Even without any type of attachment ruptures or anything like that, it's just a very confusing type of relationship because it's not a friendship, it's not a parent-child relationship. It's something where the therapist is just the giver and you're the receiver. And you may want to give back in some way and stuff like that. And you'll find pushback from your therapist if you want to buy them a gift and they're pushing you back and you feel insulted. These are things that, again, our therapists are trained to remain objective. And if they would receive from you, then they are no longer objective. And therefore, the safety gets affected and you won't have a safe, objective space in order to heal and grow. And you deserve that. So boundaries are really frustrating sometimes, but they're a way where we can say, hey, this is the way that we could be safe together. Just let me see, I have a question here. What can we do when we feel abandoned or angry when the therapist says they are not available? So the answer is to talk about it with your therapist. Right? Bring it up to your therapist and say, hey, I feel really abandoned and angry when you tell me that you're not available. And the therapist will take it from there and help you feel seen, safe, and soothed. If they are unable to do that, then maybe it's not a good fit. We talked about attachment trauma, and that's why it's very, very difficult to have the therapeutic relationship when the wound is within the relationship itself. So now when you're talking to a therapist and connecting with them, there's automatically a a challenge within that relationship, and there may be a overwhelmed nervous system going on already. Even before we get started, the idea of having to attach to a therapist, your mind and your body will react to that in a way that it wants to keep you safe. So it might keep you withdrawn, it might be very hard to talk, and these are things that people feel shame about, but again, they're normal trauma responses. And then we talked about also transference. We talked about whether you have to like or love your therapist. And we also talked about the normal push and pull and how a healthy therapist would respond. To answer the question about how do I know if I'm in like healthy therapy, if I have difficulty with attachment and I've never really felt safe and secure in a relationship, the answer to me is that we're feeling safe and secure and seen and heard. We're also frustrated by all the times that we're feeling abandoned and things like that. It's very, very normal and healthy. But the main ingredient that really shows how healthy your therapy is if your therapist is helping you become more independent over time. So in the beginning, it's very, very normal that you depend on your therapist, 100%. Same way when a young child, a baby, very much relies on their parents to meet their needs, right? You have a young baby who's crying, whatever their needs are, whether they need to be fed, whether they need to be soothed, those are very normal needs that a baby has, and they're going to cry out, and the parent comes to fill that need, right? Over time, the child learns more independence, but they can only do that if they had that dependency, if that dependency was met, if the needs were met. So in a similar way, when you come to therapy and you have a lot of needs and you're crying out and asking a lot from your therapist, that's something that makes a lot of sense, and it's okay. The therapist is there to meet those needs, and in the beginning, they might even be way more available to you than maybe later on in the therapy, because they understand that you need more from them right now. Over time, you may see that they're asking for more dependence on your part because they feel that you're truly ready for more dependence, because you have co-regulated with them, learned how to experience safety within the relationship, which maybe you never had before. So now, over time, you're now able to now go out into the world and feel more safe. If they don't push you to do that, they're not helping you. I know it feels like abandonment, and there's a lot of grief in that. But if they don't create that next step where they say, hey, I know you've been coming twice a week, but you're doing really well now. And that could take a very long time. That's okay, right? Because the wound is very deep. But if over time they suggest something like that, it might feel like abandonment because that's your history, but really understand that they are trying to help you be more independent over time. Unfortunately, there are therapists who create dependency and say things like, you'll never be anything without me, you'll never be able to leave me. Those are very, very bright red flags, and you should be very wary of somebody who says something like that. It was a pleasure being with all of you tonight, and I hope that I addressed a lot of what's on your minds. And if not, I guess let me know, and we'll hopefully be able to do another one. Take care, everybody.